Well, hello friends, I'm David Vos. It's really good to see everybody today. It's beautiful here in Texas. The sun is shining and wow, it's just perfect, the weather. Well, this will be a number 4 in the series, and I think they're just getting better and better. I think this is going to be very interesting. We're going to tell you in this video, I think we've done this in just about every one of the videos actually, but in this video, we're going to explain where the Garden of Eden is. We're going to explain where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were buried. And this information has not, as far as I know, no one's ever revealed this information, at least not in the way that we're going to reveal it today. As far as where the Garden of Eden is, you'd think that would be a simple thing. Because the Bible does give us pretty good coordinates. I mean, it does give us information about where this garden was. It says that there's a river there. And in our Bible, it makes it sound like there's a river that flows out of Eden. And from there, it parts into 4 rivers. And then it names these rivers. And some of these rivers we still have, the Euphrates and the Tigris. It calls it the Chitical. But that's the Tigris River. We know that from history, the interchanging of the names. It's really the same name, but it kind of distorts as it comes down. But we know that river, the Chitical and the Tigris. And then the Gihon and the Pison. And we don't know for sure where they are. Josephus says that one of these rivers is over here in India called the Indus River. And that's correct. But the odd thing is that all of these rivers are supposed to somehow be joined together. I mean, if you're just reading it in our Bibles, it said something about something kind of like there's a river that goes out of Eden and it parts into 4 heads. Well, how are all of this, the Tigris, actually, this would be the Euphrates and the Tigris. These 2 rivers these 2 are connected at the delta here. But they're not connected to the Indus River. They're quite a ways away from that. And then wherever the other river is, which I'm going to show is the Nile, it's not connected. So how in the world do we understand this? And what's really going on here? And where is the Garden of Eden? Now, a lot of people will say that the Garden of Eden is right here, where at the base of this, where the Euphrates and the Tigris goes into the Gulf. This is the Gulf of Aden. We talked about in another video about this whole area being Eden. And of course, there's even a town here in Yemen to this very day that they call Eden. But just like with everything else that we've been learning, we're being lied to about some things. Now, number 1, as we've said, the Bible is a symbolic book. So most of everything that's in the Bible is not going to be literal. So therefore, this is where our first mistake is. Trying to say that somehow the Garden of Eden is somewhere on the earth, necessarily. It is and may be a place that they recognize on earth originally. But the primary meaning of the word Eden is not going to be someplace on earth. So how do we understand this? If Adam was once in Eden, but he's not in Eden, he's kicked out, could that be he's kicked out of heaven? Well, now we might be talking, okay? First off, let's take a look at that verse. And I don't have a Bible handy, and I don't think you could see it, and I don't think it does anyone any good. But it's in Genesis chapter 2, and it says, and I'm going to try to say it as it does in the actual Hebrew, so you get the idea, and we're going to kind of dissect some of the words. But it says there is a river that went out And most of the translation says went out of Eden. If you look that word went out, first of all, river, it does mean river. Then went out, that could go went through or went out. Josephus, who dissects the whole Bible and rewrites the whole thing, supposedly, I think actually is one of the persons that wrote the Bible. He says that it means goes through. And the reason why we're fairly positive that Josephus is correct, that it should say it went through Eden, is because it says it watered the whole Garden of Eden. Okay. And then from there, it says it parted and became 4 heads or river heads. So if it were to say it went out of Eden, then the 4 rivers would be someplace not in Eden. So that's a possibility. Either it's the river goes through Eden, or the river goes out of Eden. And from there, either out of Eden or somewhere in Eden, in the middle of Eden, from there it parts into 4 heads. Now let's take the next word. Parts. If you look that word up in Strong's Concordance, it's going to say divides or separates. So you can understand why they would translate it parts, but it doesn't mean depart necessarily, because to part means to be a part of something and then depart, to go away from it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that. It means to separate it. So here you've got a river going through Eden, and it's separated. And then it says it becomes 4 heads. That's the word Rosh, head, beginning, start. So the start of these rivers are going to be what it's talking about, the beginning of 4 rivers. Now, if you look at this particular chart, what I'm going to explain to you today is that Eden was really the land that's between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer. Capricorn and Cancer. This is the equator. And everything that's tropical, the tropical zone, is Eden. Now, I'm going to explain why we know this is to be the truth. As we said yesterday, the river that goes through Eden is the Milky Way. If you live in the city, you might not be able to see it. But if you go into the country and you look up in the sky, you're going to see the Milky Way. It's brilliant. A lot of you have never seen it. Go someplace where it's pitch black, dark, out in the middle of nowhere, away from the cities, and look up, and you can see the stars up there, here and there. But right in the middle, this big river. It's a stream, and the ancient ones knew that by various names. Depending on where you were. I mean, in Egypt, they understood it to be the Nile. They called that, this Nile represented that. And up here, it was the Euphrates. But the Greeks called it the river Styx in all of their mythologies back from Troy and the Argonauts and so forth. But the Druids and all the various nations had their Garden of Eden, and they had their river. Because it's all based on the very same thing, astrology. And so when you look up in the sky, why would it be between Capricorn or Cancer and Capricorn? Because this is the area where all the animals are, the zoo. We call it the zodiac or the zodiac. And this is astrology, where all the animals of the garden are. And so in the garden, in the middle of the garden, there's a river. And there's a tree. There's 2 trees. The Bible talks about the 2 trees. And it says there are 2 olive trees. And these are the 2 witnesses that stand before the Lord of the whole earth. And it says there are two anointed ones, because the tree, being olive trees, anoints. So now in esoteric wisdom in the East and so forth, they talk about these serpents. There were 2 serpents. The Bible talks about the serpent as well on one of these trees. What is the serpent? The serpent is, as we've said in many of my videos, it's all the planets. The head of the serpent is the sun. And when the ancient ones would look up into the sky, they would see this serpent. It looked like it went in an S pattern. It doesn't really, though. It actually goes in a circle. It goes around and around this point. We're going to show you that. It goes around and around, but it never comes back to the same spot because it's going forward. So it's going like this in a spiral towards the center of the galaxy. Just like your DNA, which is that little nun, which is the Hebrew word for the little serpent that is your DNA. And so this is why you have today the medical industry that has the caduceus with the two serpents. And this is what it all goes back to, is this god Enki, who was this mad scientist that came to the world, and he put these serpents in the garden. He made the garden and he put the serpents in the garden, and it's talking about the patterns and the DNA and the whole instructions of all of this that he created. So in the middle of the garden, we've got a river. That's basically the equator, because the equator marks that river. If you look up in the sky, now why would it be that? Why would they say, okay, that Milky Way line is the equator? Because that Milky Way is this congregation of all these stars in a stream, and the zoo goes around like this, as well as the planets with the sun goes in the sky like this. So they understood the straight line, the Milky Way, as a river. This is why in the Bible it says that in the beginning God made the heavens and the earth, and he separated the waters from above from the waters that are beneath. Now, most of us have looked at that and we've said, what in the world are the ancient peoples? Are they stupid? Did they really think there was a bunch of water in the sky that, well, the sky's blue, so maybe they thought that blue color was all water. Well, then what happens at night when this goes black, right? And there's all these stars come out. Did they think, oh, well, the water all went away and now we're, what were they thinking? Well, they weren't as stupid as you think. In fact, they knew how many planets, they knew how many rings were around Saturn, how many rings and spots were on Jupiter, and how, which ones of the planets were the largest and the furthest out. They knew about the asteroid belt. They claimed they came to this planet on a ship, and they've described the whole thing. They describe all of their history and our history and how we got here. And one of the things that they say, if you're reading the Sumerian tablets, is that they came from a place called Iridana. Now we call it a lot of times Eridu. And when they left Iridana, they came to the world, and where they landed, they built the city of Ur. Okay, Uruk and Ur. It's a little area right here at the base of the Mesopotamian area, or the land of Sumer. And so Ur, as we've said in many of my videos, represents the word or, Ra. These are all rays, radiation, Ra, or, as in gold. All of those words, Ur, like Jerusalem, all of those words represents the sun. Horus, and Mount Horeb, because orb, we get the B on the end for a circle or an orb. We're going to talk more about that too. All of these words go back to the same etymology, the same root. And they all have something to do with the light or the sun or the orb of the sun or the center of the world. So they say that they came from Iridana. Well, if you look in the sky, there is a constellation in the sky that is the longest constellation that we have in the sky. And that is called Iridana. And it really is the great river. Sometimes it's written or drawn as a serpent. But Eridanus was this river. So what they were saying is that they came from the stars. They didn't come from the planet. These were people who came to the earth on spaceships. And of course, You know, the indigenous peoples probably say, well, where'd you guys come from? You know, and they're like, well, I'll tell you what now. You see that little star out there? And then this is, come look at our spaceship and look at... No, they didn't do that, because they might have done that originally, the first man that was here. But, you know, over time, to be able to teach this to people, because people weren't ready for all of this information, because there were people that were burning books and so forth, as we said, they had to write it down in symbols so that one day we would be able to understand. The symbols are going to preserve the truth, even if people burn the records and so forth, because they won't know, oh, this little parable is saying something. They don't know what it says, so they just think it's just a little nursery rhyme or whatever, and they let it go. So this is how we've gotten all of this preserved, by the fact that they didn't tell us where, in sort of plain English. Well, they did originally. The Sumerian tablets are pretty much written in plain Sumerian, so those people probably read it and got a lot of real, literal information at one time. But it happened that over time, they got rid of all those books. The priests, they buried them in the ground, they hid them up because they knew that they were burning these books. They were getting rid of all the libraries. Around the time of Rome, we lost all of this information. But originally, they did have all this information down. So, they came from the river in the sky on a boat, right? Well, it was actually a spaceship, but they explained it this way. And when they got here, they named it Ur, because this is represents the city where the gods first came, and this is the beginning. This is where it all begins. And they were trying to teach a spiritual thing, so they wanted you to understand that everything comes from the source, from the sun, and we all have, everything in the universe is a circle. Okay, because the whole, you can't describe the whole of everything except with a circle. See, everything within this goes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller into the center. And then the source comes from the center. This is why everything goes around and around, and our sun's in the middle, and we're going around and around. And then this galaxy's going around and around, everything's bright and light in the center, and it's just the way it works with everything. So they use the circle as an expression of everything. And then they divided up with numerology. It's a science, and today we have it as 12, and we got 360 degrees because there were 60 seconds and 60 minutes, and 6 times 6 is 36, and it's all this sacred science of 6s, 9s, and 10s. There are 7 days in a week, and then there is 52 weeks in a year, and there are 72 decans that go 3 decans in each of the 12, then you get 12 and 12 is 24, and another 12 is 36. So there's your 360 degrees. And basically this goes around twice. You've got 12 and 12, which is 24. The 24 elders around God's throne, and there's the center. And so therefore you'd end up having 72 deacons. This is why Jesus chose 12 apostles, and then later he chose 70 also. Now, a lot of times in the Bible, it rounds the numbers off. The 144,000 are also had a lot to do with this. Remember, Jesus said, he being the Son, he represents the Son. He says, I've got 12 legions of angels that are under my command. And each legion is 6,000. And so it comes out to 72. And you can time this by itself, and it comes out to 144,000. So it's just amazing, all this information that was sort of coded in numerology, in language, in science, and in the heavens, and in the stars. And so here we are left to figure it all out. Our beginnings, where did we come from? Well, Jesus said we're spirit. The flesh, it's not that important. The spirit is what's important. And so he was describing, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. And I go to prepare a place for you. The house, remember, each of these 12 regions inside of the astrological circle is a house. We call it the house of Leo, or the house of Cancer, or Capricorn, or, Libra, or whatever. You're born in a certain house. And this is what Jesus was talking about. So, Abraham then, instead of being an historical figure, represents the beginning of everyone. He starts off as the father, Abram. That was his name originally. Then they changed it to Abraham. But Abram is the same word they use in the East for Brahma, which begins everything. So Brahma, according to the Apostle Paul, is the father of faith. And this means he's the father of all faiths. The Jews recognize Abraham as their father. The Christians recognize Abraham as their father. The Muslims recognize Abraham as their father. And the Hindu and the Eastern religions all recognize Brahma as their father, or Abram. So he is indeed the father of all nations. Now, it says in our Bibles that Abram went out from Ur of the Chaldeans. That's this place right here. This is where he went out, because this is where they landed. It says that he went unto a place that God would show him. Well, we're told that he goes over here to a little place called Haran, and, you know, his father dies, and him and Lot and Sarah, which were all relatives from this particular house, they go down and they keep trekking, and they go to a place called Hebron. And we're told that it's up here in a little place called Israel. As we've said, this is symbolic. It wasn't a place called Palestine, because they've sort of rewritten everything, all of our history, and done it in symbols, just like what we're saying now. Eridu really is in the sky, okay, but then they put a place on earth to represent that place. So we want to know, where is this Hebron that Abraham went? The reason why we want to know is because this place called Hebron is very important. In our Bible, it doesn't call it Hebron at first. The first thing is that Abraham went out and he went to a place called Kiriath Arba. And it's funny to me that the Bible is written in Hebrew, the Old Testament, you know. And then all of a sudden, there's words that they'll just leave it in Hebrew. Like, well, you going to translate that? Maybe we don't know what it means, or I don't know. Or they don't want you to know what it means. It's what I think. But Kiriath Arba, what is that? Why didn't you say city of Arba or something, or city of the four? Because that's what it means. Kiriath is the city. Everywhere else that they use that word in Hebrew, they just translate it city. But in this place, they say Kiriath. And then they say Arba. And then they say that later on, it became known as Hebron. Well, that's ridiculous. It's the same word. Hebron. The H is silent. Abra. Arba. It's the same word. It never was changed. They didn't change the name. Okay? But what's interesting is where you read that, Kiriath Arba, if you look it up on Google and go find the place where it says that Abraham went there, it'll say that he bought this Kiriath Arba from Heth, the sons of Heth, because the Jews in the Midrash say that the reason why he wanted that land, because he lived there for many years, and his wife was going to die, Sarah, and he wanted a place to bury her. So he needs some water, and he finds this cave, and he goes down in the cave, and he notices that there's a skull there. And then he has this vision, and he finds out that that skull is the skull of Adam, the original man. And so he just comes up out of that cave. He says, man, I got to have this cave. What do you want for it? And the sons of Heth say, well, I don't know. Sounds like you want this cave pretty bad. How about 500 shekels? You know? Evidently, that's a lot of money back in those days. And from what I've been told, it's an exorbitant amount of money. But he bought that cave because he knew that that was the place where Adam was buried. And that's where he wanted to bury him and his children, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their wives, and everybody was buried there. And we're being told that these pagan pharaohs that mean nothing, don't even need to know their name as Christians. We don't even care who they were, right? Who are these people, right? But they've got these huge pyramids, like the pyramid at Giza, 490 feet tall, each of the stones weighing many tons, like 90, 100 tons or something. And we don't even have a forklift today, or I mean a crane or any kind of equipment that would actually be able to lift these things, let alone put them into place. 13 acres at the base of this thing. It's level from one end to the other. completely perfectly level. We could not do that with our technology today. You couldn't get a piece of paper in between the rocks. And you can't even see the chisel marks on these huge stones. So it is just flat amazing. The reason why that these things were built, the Bible says this was the land of giants. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they were tall, although they were, according to the Bible, maybe a symbol. But it does say that Goliath was like 13 feet tall, and many of these other giants were like 17 feet tall. However, what it really means is they were heroes. They were giants in intellect. They had advanced technology. That's how they were able to build these things. And so Egypt down here, where these pyramids were, is the land of the giants. Now that gives us a clue right there where Abraham may have went. But back to this Hebrew, or Kiryat Arba. You see, why did they not translate it? The word Arba is orb. And so now you know where the mountain of Horeb is. It's Hebron. Today they translate it, words just keep changing. Today we translate it Chevron. That's that oil company, that the Jews own, Chevron. It means Hebron or Arba or Horeb. And it is the mountain of God, where Moses got the original commandments of love. But later on, he broke those commandments and went up another mountain called Sin or Sinai. And Sin in the Hebrew language is one of the letters, and it means the moon. So it was the lesser light. And it's these carnal commandments. And we talked about that in other videos. So now we know where Horeb was. It's this place called Hora, Harba, Hebrew. Okay? There's some that even say that the word Hebrew, Hebrew people, they didn't get that name from Eber, their father, Abraham's great-great-grandfather, but they might have gotten their name from this place called Horeb, where Abraham dwelt, because it's where he went. When he came out of Ur, he went to this place called Kiryat, the city of Arba, or Oreb, or Horeb. And wait till you find out where this place is, because then you'll understand why it's the city of light. Orb, the orb in the sky, the ore, the gold, the light. Horus. So then he buys this cave, and he Sarah dies and he buries her there. And when he dies, he's buried there, and Jacob and Isaac and all the patriarchs were buried there. But they call that cave Machpelah. That's a curious word, because Machpelah is supposed to be if you were translate, again, one of these words, they don't want to translate it now, because then you might get a clue. We'll just keep it in Hebrew. We'll feel the Machpelah. All right. They say it literally means a cave that enfolds within itself. Curious word, isn't it? I'm going to explain in this video what that means. I mean, you're going to know what that means by the time this video is over. A cave, a hole that enfolds within itself. You're going to find out what that is. Do you know what is near this place? Because you see, Abraham came to this place and he found a tree. He called it the trees of Mamre. There's none of one of those words, right? But it was this mountain. And this is another place where a little bit later, a woman named Deborah came down in the line of the prophets. And Deborah was the mother of Israel. And she was actually the one who began to teach the mysteries. She taught Samson and Samuel. Bet you didn't know that. They sat at her feet. You know how Jesus had disciples? John the Baptist had disciples? Well, they all did this all the way back to Deborah, who had disciples. And one of her disciples was Samuel, who became the great high priest of Israel. And where did they worship? From the time of Deborah, they worshiped a place called Bethel. And that means the house of God. That's interesting, because remember now, we said Horeb is the house of light. That's the commandments we're supposed to be under, the commandments of light and love. El Elyon, who gave Abraham the promise. Not this mountain of sin, right, where we got all these carnal commandments, but the light. And so the funny thing is all the prophets came about because they joined the school of the prophets. And that school of the prophets was originally started by Deborah, but then later on it became known as the school of the prophets that Elijah was the head over, because he was the head of it during that time that Elijah existed on the earth. So the school of the prophets. So who were these prophets? Well, they all worshipped in a place called Bethel. If you look in the book of Kings and Chronicles and stuff, you'll find out they went to a little place called Bethel, the house of God. And the reason why is because there was a beautiful stone there that Jacob's laid his head on. And it says that he had a dream in the middle of the night. That's where his name was changed to Israel. He went from Jacob to Israel, which is Yah, the god of the night in that Sin mountain, to the El, which is the Helios in Greek, Helios, the center of the wheel. And so he became known as Israel, and he laid his head on the rock. This is how it happened. And he saw the angels of God ascending and descending upon this rock. This is the same rock that evidently Abraham found when he came to this area, and there was a tree called Mamre. And it was either at that spot or about 2 miles from there, but this is where all of this happened. There's a bunch of things that happened, and a lot of names, all in this little area around maybe a 2-mile stretch. One of the names is Bethel, the house of God. One of the names is Horeb, the mountain of God. That Abraham went and called it Hebron, which may be where the Hebrews get their name, because that's where they lived for years and years. That's where Abraham was buried, and Sarah and Jacob and all of them. So sounds like it could be. We're not sure about a lot of these things. They might have gotten their names from Eber. We're not sure. It doesn't say in the Bible, the Hebrews got their name from Eber. It doesn't say that. We're just guessing. I'm going to guess that they got their name from this place called Hebron, or Heber, Arba, the city of Arba, Hebron, which means light. But the other thing is that when Joshua came into the land to conquer it, this is the first place he went to. Okay, Jericho and stuff. But before he went to Jericho, he went to they crossed the river. Okay, they call it the River Jordan. But remember, these are all just names that mean, Jordan actually comes from this. Remember the word, what we just mentioned, the river that was Iridanus? Iridanus is Jordanus. So it's the river Jordan is the river Iridanus, which is the river in the sky. And so it has no relation to the river in Palestine today, which is just a modern name for a river. Maybe not so modern. It's an ancient name. It's been that name for a while. But that's why they named it after a more ancient word written in the sky, Iridanus, or the Milky Way. So I'm going to show you where this river actually was, this Jordan River that Joshua crossed, and it's this Nile. Well, it says he crossed the river, and there was and of course, to get across the river, they got to take all the children of Israel. You know, it's one of these parting the river deals, right? So the river just parted. You know, we don't talk about that. We know about Moses parting the river, and Paul says they were all baptized into Moses. We got to be baptized into Christ. But yeah, the river was just parted, and when they got to the bottom of the riverbed, it was all dry, they set up 12 stones, and they called it Gilgal. And so there was a little community at that spot for years that was called Gilgal. Well, again, one of those little names that they don't really want you to know what it means. You got to go look it up. But it means the wheel of rebirth, or the wheel of astrology. The 12 stones are the 12 houses in astrology. So now we've got Bethel, we've got Horeb, we've got Gilgal, the wheel, Jerusalem, which there's no J, it's Uru, Salem, Uru, just like the that he went out from. He comes to a place called Uru. So here's this little area within 2 miles. We've got a mountain, we've got a tree, we've got a river. And you see, all of this comes out from the middle of the garden. It was the land of promise that Joshua was going to go in and conquer. And another one of the little places in there within about 2 miles of that little spot is called Jericho. This was the first battle that Joshua wages, but the first major battle because this was impregnable. These walls, huge walls, and it's not by might, saith the Lord, but by my Spirit. Because you see, the carnal means nothing. This is not about the carnal. This is not a literal book. We don't take this literally. There wasn't any Jericho. There wasn't any Jerusalem. There wasn't any of this. Not in reality. It doesn't matter if there was or if there wasn't, because we're reading a spiritual story about our spiritual well-being, our salvation. And so what we're trying to do is not murder people. Come on, Joshua and Caleb, let's go down there, and kill these giants and murder them. Yeah, we're going to get some guns and some gunpowder. And see, if we follow the Bible literally, us Christians be out murdering everybody. Oh, we are, huh? I guess we shouldn't be taking it literally then, because Jesus said, turn the other cheek. Don't be killing people, right? Love your enemies. But this is just a story, and Jericho's just a story. And these impregnable walls in this place called Gilgal, Mount Horeb, the center of the world, we're going to find out. It's literally the center of the navel of the earth. And there's a reason why it's a cave, Machpelah, that goes within itself. We're going to find out exactly where Jesus died, because that's the same place that Adam died, same place that Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, Adam, and the same place that Jesus died on the hill or the mountain called Golgotha, or the head, which we've said is this place up here in Goshen, where Israel was for 500 years, for sure, that the Bible literally, in literal form, explains to us that they lived there. So in the days of Abraham, this place called Goshen, or the head. Now, you're probably getting the implication now that this particular place might be something to do with the center of the astrological wheel. And you'd be right. But where is the center of the astrological wheel? See, because when the walls come down, the physical, there's a soul that's kind of defiled. She's a harlot. Rahab the harlot. We got to save her. Why do you think, what in the world? God says, now I want you to kill every man, woman, and child when you go in there. Just kill them all. Bash the babies against the sides of the rocks and, crush them and kill the donkeys and their dogs and put rocks in their fields so nothing can grow. Man, we're just going to genocide this. Okay. But see that harlot? I want you to save her. Well, this doesn't make any sense, does it? Because Joshua kept telling him, I don't want you taking anything from this. Don't take the spoils. Murder them. Kill them. You can't even have any of the women in this area. Later on, they went into different areas and they were able to kill all the men. And, they took the women for themselves on booty and the gold and stuff. But in this area, they couldn't even take the gold. Only thing they could take out of there was a woman. A woman who was a prostitute. That's your soul. And they didn't bring the walls of Jericho down with their mighty weapons of war. But no, they put the singers. Remember we talked about how we need to sing and raise our level of consciousness? Go into an upper room, pray in the mountain. Okay, in the head, in the mountain. Well, you see, they didn't put the military in the front of Israel. And they marched around the city of Jericho. Just marched with the band in the front, right? Playing harps and playing on trumpets. Because you see, they need to raise their level of consciousness. And by spirit, not by might, saith the Lord, those walls came down. And that's trying to tell you something. All right. So, now, man, I've already been almost 40 minutes, and I ain't got nowhere in this. This one little thing I wanted to tell you could take 2 videos, I guess. I mean, this is just crazy. I'm trying to explain this to you in, step by step so that you really understand this, so that you know for sure where this city is and where Jerusalem is and where the Jews actually are supposed to be and where Abraham actually went and where he was buried. Because it's not about knowing where Abraham was buried, but it's about knowing where this city is, because it's a spiritual revelation. We're going to get a spiritual revelation out of this. It's going to be amazing. And for the first time you've never heard before in your life, the first time, you're going to find out where the Garden of Eden was. You're going to find out where Jesus was murdered, because Revelation chapter 11 says that the two witnesses die on the streets of Egypt and Sodom, where their Lord was also crucified. He was crucified in Egypt, not in a place called Palestine. Never was such a place. It's all made up. So, how do we know where this place is? Well, I want you to see something. This is the most beautiful thing. Oh, buddy, you're going to love this. You see this spot right here? That's where the Great Pyramid is. Do you know what the coordinates are? It's 30 degrees north latitude, and it's 30 degrees longitude. Now, what's the deal with 30? Well, it's not. It's not 30. You see, because today the prime meridian is over here in like England, right? 30 degrees over. 31 degrees exactly. Too far that way. It's an arbitrary line. Now, 1800 or some 1780 or whatever it was, they decided to make the line there because England became the ruler of the world and they decided that time was going to start there. All right, but originally they weren't the rulers of the world. And this is a very odd place to make the center of the world because if you notice, doesn't even look like the center of the world. Wouldn't the equator be a better place? Wouldn't that be a better, yeah, that's the center of the garden, the astrological zodiac thing. So, this is 31 degrees wrong this way and this way as well. If you were to move this, what they call it, the prime meridian. Do you know Joseph Smith said Jesus died at the meridian of time? And most people read that and say, what is Joseph Smith talking about? This prophet. What meridian, right? Merid. Maybe he means the middle of time. Well, that was 2,000 years ago. And even Christians believe that it's been 6,000 years. So that's not the middle. So what is Joseph Smith saying? Well, you see, astrologers know what a meridian is. And the prime meridian is where you would go to zero. Well, all the other demarcations and meridian lines all the way around the world, they all start at zero. And the original prime meridian was right here at the Great Pyramid. Now, why is that? Well, for one, that's the actual center of all the land masses of the world. And they say the Egyptians knew this. That's why they built the pyramid there. But they couldn't have known that. There's no way they could know that with little, they didn't have telescopes and they didn't have all this equipment and radio towers and satellites. How would they know? We've only discovered this recently. Well, they had spaceships come to the earth. They had more technology than we do. All right? But I want to show you something. Not only is this Great Pyramid on the 30th parallel, but the Indus River empties into the... And see, the Nile starts down here at the equator. And it flows towards, exactly on the equator, on Lake Victoria. And it flows all the way to the 30th parallel. Well, the Indus River starts way up here, and it flows into the ocean at the 30th parallel. But it goes the other way. Almost all the ancient rivers empty into the water at the 30th parallel today. Even Orleans, the Mississippi. There's that Or again. Even the Rojo River, Colorado, ends at the 30th parallel. Comes down and empties out right there at the 30th parallel. Indus River, the Yangtzes, the Ganges, the Tigris, the Euphrates, all of them enter at the 30th parallel. Could this be coincidence? Could it be coincidence that this spot right here, which originally was where the equator was, because remember there's a tilt, the earth does this. So the equator wasn't always where it is today. The earth tilts on its axis and it moves over the ages. And if you spin the earth back about 10, 12,000 years, you'll find out that the axis of the earth, the equator, wasn't down here, but it was right here. And this would mean that because the Tropic of Cancer is 23.5 degrees. So if you go up just a few more degrees to the 30th parallel, that's where the equator actually used to be. And so the prime meridian was the longitude and latitude right there in Egypt. That is the exact center of all geographical land masses. And in the year about 10,500 BC, that very moment when this particular spot was the prime meridian, if you look up in the sky, there's shafts in the pyramids that go right to Sirius and Orion. And it marks the beginning of our calendar, which is the prime meridian. This is how you understand astrology. And without this information, you wouldn't know the sciences, you wouldn't know the astrology, you wouldn't know the calendar, the long calendar of 24,000 years, when it ends and when it begins. There is a lot about astrology that we're not going to discuss in this because we're already 46 minutes and I ain't got much more time, but I want to get this in here, friends. I want to get this in here about where this is. So the Great Pyramid then is the center of the world. And not only is it the center of all the land masses, but it is the center of the Milky Way when it was originally created and the gods came here from Adonis and made Ur and Ur and Ur and Ur. But we started off in this video talking about where is this river and where is, because it flows through Eden, and then where are these other four rivers? Because one of them goes around Havilah, one of them goes around Ethiopia, one of them goes east towards Assyria, and one of them, there's a bunch of gold in one of them and stuff. So where is this? We've been racking our brain because the Hebrew doesn't make sense. There is no river in the world that parts into four heads and goes to these locations. What are these locations? What are they talking about? Well, when the gods got here, there were four. There was Enlil and Enki and Herzag and Inanna. And they divided up the world between them. The Bible talks about this and says that just before Abraham went out of Ur, it says, his great-grandfather was Peleg. And it says that they named him that because that's when they divided the earth. What do you mean divided the earth? Yeah, the gods divided up the earth. And Enki, or Yahweh, it says in the Hebrew, right in your Bible, Enoch Yahweh. So Enki, or he got Africa. It was called the Abzu, the land down below. Well, wait a minute now. This proves then that the prime meridian has changed because the land down below, is Africa. So, but part of Africa is above. So it can't be. Originally, it was all down below the equator. See, everything south of the equator is degrees going backwards. And everything above the equator is degrees going, there's 30 degrees north latitude. See, would go up to, would move down to the equator. And this would make all of Africa beneath. So Enki got this area, and then these rivers then represent the four locations. One person got this area, one person got this area, one god got this area, and one god got the Indus Valley. And Josephus talks about that. This was a great civilization that was along the Indus River. One of the more ancient ancient civilizations of our globe came from the Indus Valley. Another one came from the Mesopotamia, and another one came from Egypt. And there were two of them, the Assyrian and the other side that goes up in here. So, the dividing of the world occurred with these rivers. And that's what it means when it says that there was a dividing. The rivers divided. But what did they divide? They divided the river, or the center, the Milky Way. And so when you divide up the earth, you do it with the meridians that are marked by the stars. There's no other way to divide it. You say, well, when the star gets right here, then that's the line, see? So the meridian has to be according to the sky. And that's why when you look at Washington, D.C., you've got all these lines and it looks like a pentagram right in the middle of the city. You're like, what? You could draw a line from Mexico City right straight through Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston, all the way over to Stonehenge. It's a straight line. The whole world was mapped out with these meridians. But you don't know what you're doing You can't figure it out unless you go back to the prime meridian being here at the Great Pyramid. And so, here's the beauty of it. And we're coming up on 50 minutes, so I gotta be quick here. But when you move this up 30 degrees so that the zero equator is right at the pyramid where it used to be, the prime meridian, that means that instead of all of these rivers emptying into the 30th north latitude degrees, they all empty into the equator or into the great river. And so now we understand what it means is that this river runs through the garden, and these major rivers all go into the river. Because you see, any river, it's not like what you're thinking, that a river goes along and all of a sudden it has branches. It doesn't mean a branch. Rivers don't do that. Like, look at the Mississippi. The Missouri runs into the Mississippi. The Ohio runs into the Mississippi. The Red River runs into the Mississippi. Mississippi doesn't branch off and make other rivers. The other rivers go into the larger river. The largest river is the river in the sky. See, in the beginning, God He divided the waters from the waters, and that's what He's talking about. Because and He created the garden, all the zoo, and the serpent, the wisest of the creatures. That's where He made it. And we're spiritual beings, and we came from up above. And so, these other major civilizations that feed from the waters of life, that receive they have to have water to survive, all these civilizations. And these civilizations all go back into the great river, which is your soul, right in the center. And there's where the tree of life is, and the water, and the great river, and everything. So you move this equator up here, and now it's no longer 30 degrees north latitude, but all the rivers run into the center of the world, into the center of the garden. And so then you understand what the Hebrew's meaning when it says the heads or beginnings, because they flow into. See, the river went through the garden and watered the whole garden. And there were 4 rivers that separated it, that ran into it. And that's then where the Garden of Eden is. Look up in the sky, and you'll see it as clear as day. That's the Eridanus, that's the Jordanus, and that's the Nile. So what we've got here is that Africa is the only area down here, civilization, that's below the equator, because the equator's right here. So everything below then is the Absu. This is where Enki, Yahweh, he became the god of this area. He divided this up between his children, Marduk, and his children, Isis and Osiris. But for some reason I've got a cough this morning. I don't know. I have a tickle in my throat. Excuse me. But you see that the river then would begin not at the equator as it does now, but the river then would begin at the Tropic of Capricorn, and it would empty into the equator from beneath going this way, because it's on the southern end. There's a wheel, and the center of the wheel would be right here. And so this Indus River kind of goes in this direction and empties at the equator. The Tigris goes this way and empties at the equator, and then the Euphrates comes around this way, kind of from east to, or from west to east, and empties at the equator. And then this one comes up from the bottom. So it's kind of like a wheel, and all these rivers run into the center. And if you ever look at cosmology and some of the ancient maps, they make the world in a thing where there's these 4 rivers, and it all goes to the center, and that's what this is showing you. Is showing you these 4 rivers and the center of civilization, which would be right here at the equator. Pretty interesting, huh? So I'm just thinking of other things I could tell you before I go. There's so many, I've got just a minute left, but this is just fascinating, because I think the 4 rivers are these 4 here. These are the ones that the Bible talks about. This is the land of where the land is good of gold and Havilah, and this is you know, the Euphrates and the Tigris that it actually mentions there. And then Josephus says this one is the Indus. So we're pretty sure these are the 4 rivers. However, it's also interesting that there are other rivers. They didn't know about this area because they originally landed over here and they started civilizations over here. But as time went on, other civilizations were begun. Interesting how all these rivers even in America all empty into the 30th parallel, which at that time would have been the equator. So this would have been all tropical at that time. The Yangtzes, this is the Yangtzes. The Yangtzes empties into the 30th parallel as well, which would be the equator. Just about every river. But only this one goes this way. Goes in the opposite direction because it's at the bottom. It's almost as if the whole thing was planned out. The way the earth was made, right? The continents, the rivers, and everything was made perfectly to make this astrological chart called astrology. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and go, friends. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and we'll see you again tomorrow. You guys have a great day.